In this episode, it's all about adding color. Let's check it out. Alright guys, welcome to this week's episode. My name is Jose Vega. I'm a concept artist at artjosevega.com, and in this channel I like to share with you guys my tips and tricks for Photoshop in digital painting. Now this week's episode, I'm going to be taking a black and white simple sketch and I'm going to be adding color using different methods. So let's check it out.
Okay, so let's take a look at here. I have a very simple sketch here, and let me show you a little bit about the process on this sketch. And this is a very simple sketch that I did on my sketchbook using a brush ink or ink brush, water brush, and just playing out with shapes and trying to look for some interesting rock formations. I just did that very simple, and then I imported it into Photoshop and kind of did a little more complete sketch just to kind of get an idea of what this space is all about. Now, we're going to be talking about color and how to add color to a black and white piece, or how to add color to a color piece. Now, before I show you the different ways, I want to talk to you a little bit about my way of thinking on the color picker here, and also the color tab here in Photoshop. Now again, this is a very old Photoshop version, but so it might look a little bit different, but I don't know. This is a CS3 Photoshop. Now let's start with the color tab here. Let me close this. And here, most of the time I have it on CMYK format here. Now you can change that going here in the drop down, and you have all these different options. So sometimes when I'm working in black and white, I just put it in grayscale slider here, and I have all my range of black and whites only, and I'm not distracted by the colors or anything. And then you have RGB, which is your primary, and then your HSB, which is your hue. You can choose your hue or temperature. I like to think more of temperature instead of hue. And then the saturation of that temperature, and then the lightness or how dark it is of that hue. And also you have CMYK, which is the one that I usually the most. And here you have the cyan, magenta, and the other colors in black. So here you can slide and add or take away from those colors. So there's no right way or wrong way of doing this. It's just personal choice, and that's about it about this right here. Now, when I go to the color picker here, most of the time by default is here on the H selected here, and you have something like that looks like this, and this is the most usual or common way. And I use this a lot too, but a lot of times I like to use here when I go to the A here, and I'm no idea what the A stands for, so I have to look that up. But here, what this does is, or how I use it is, if I have a color, let's say I have that red color here. Now I'm looking at this big square here, and the line, if I throw an invisible line in the middle, is the less saturated of that color. And if I go to the left of that line, which is the left side of this big square, it's gonna go to the cooler versions of that color. And if I go to the right, it's gonna be the warmer versions. If I go up on the square, it's gonna be lighter, and if I go down, it's gonna be darker. So sometimes I have a color. Let's say I have this color here, and let's do a little test here, right? And I am gonna just do a quick shape here. Just gonna add a little bit here, just fill that in. So let's say I want to be just a little bit darker and less saturated, and let's make the background just a little bit cooler. So let's say I have this piece of let's just say a rock, and I want to add some cooler bounce lights on the right side of the rock from the environment. So I can grab that color. You can see that it changes here. So I have here, change the color here. And Since I want to add a cooler bounce light, cooler goes to the left and light goes up. So I'm going to go a little bit left and up. And then I'm going to grab that color. And then I can lock in that side of the rock that is going to be hit by that cooler cooler tone or cooler bounce light. And I can do that with rim light or let's say a more direct spotlight or something. It's just I gotta play with the position of where I'm gonna change the cursor here on that big square. And if I want to go a little bit cooler, maybe push those blues a little bit more saturated, a little bit more to the left. Want to go a little bit lighter too. And that way, it's gonna give me an idea of what that color is gonna look like with that effect of being hit by a cooler light or bounce light or whatever the case may be, right? So I use that a lot, and I found it to be very, very helpful. So that's it about that. Now let's go back to my sketch here, and again, this comes from a very simple sketch on my sketchbook, and I have a couple layers here. I have some bookhead type of effect here, dealing with my values with a curve adjustment layer here to make it a little bit more not so contrasty. And I have a couple layers here for my foreground and some effects and all that. But I'm not gonna worry too much about the layers, because the reason I wanna play with this is because sometimes I have a black and white sketch like this one, and I just want to play with what the colors might look like. So I'm gonna do a couple variations of colors schemes for this particular piece, and so it needs to be a little bit, it needs to be fast and efficient for me to explore different ideas for the color scheme. But I kind of have an idea of the color scheme that I want. So before I do that, I want to show you actually the different ways that you can do to add color to this, and then I'll do a time lapse just to actually applying it to this piece. So I duplicated the whole group of my layers, and I'm just gonna merge it. That way I just have one layer here, just one layer, so I can play with it. Right now, the first way to add color is just to add a new layer, and you go to the blending modes and you just put color. Now I'm gonna grab another brush here, and let's say you want to play with warm versus cool lights here. So you have a very nice warm light coming from the outside into this underground cave, and then everything else looks has this cooler tone. And so I put my layer on color, and let's just say I want to have some kind of warm terracotta type of color, and you can go 100%, right, like this, but you can see that the color looks flat. That's something that I try to avoid, especially when I'm experimenting with different color schemes. So instead of going like that, I can pick that color, and now I can go to my brushes settings here. I'm gonna go to color dynamics. Now, if you watch my how to create brushes video, you're gonna see that I skipped over the color dynamics because I wanted to leave it for this particular episode. And here I'm gonna check that in, so it is activated, and I'm gonna play with the hue jitter. Now the hue jitter, pretty much depending on the percentage that you put here on the slider, is gonna have a variation of colors between your foreground color and your background color, which are these two right here. So the one on the top left is going to be your foreground color, and then the bottom right is going to be your background color. Now you can swap this using your X key on your keyboard. You can swap them out. You can reset them using your D on your keyboard, set reception to black and white. And you can swap them here, right? And you can also see it here on the color tab here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go a little bit crazy here so you can actually see the effect that this hue jitter does before I actually apply it. So right now I have this color here and the black. Now I'm gonna switch here and I'm gonna grab a darker color but still on the warmer temperature, maybe something like that. Now I'm gonna go 100% just so you can actually see it. And this is a texture brush that it has some texture to it. You can see it here. And I'm gonna apply it very light here. And you can see that it doesn't apply just one color. It's applying a bunch of variations of those two colors that I have on my foreground and my background here. You can see sometimes it gets very saturated reds, and there's like more into the greenish type of temperature here. So this is super cool. I found it very useful because not everything in real life has a flat color and that's it. Like when you look at skin, you know, skin has so many different pigments of color. You know, you have reds, you have greens, you have yellows, blues, and that variation gives you a very nice, realistic, and believable feel to whatever it is that you're painting. So you can see here that it's adding a very nice variation. Now I could go very crazy. So let's just say instead of a warm color, I'm gonna pick this bluish here, and I'm gonna go again here. Now you can see that it goes even more crazy like that. You can see that it's adding every time I'm tapping with the brush. It adds variation to my colors here. And depending on the percentage I put here, it's gonna get really crazy. So let's just say, let's reset this. So add it. I usually don't go very high, so I keep it very low. But let's just try it out. So now you can see even more crazy variation in there. So I usually use it, you know, very light in terms of the percentage here on the hue jitter. That way I have a little bit more control of that change of hue on my strokes. Okay, so that's one way to do it with the color. Now you don't have to use the color dynamics for this to work. Like you just click that off and just put one color. Like I put the whole reddish color in there, and it just adds that, right? And the color layer pretty much takes in consideration your values that you have on your scene and applies that color to that value. So the values are very important for that to work. All right. Now another way that you can add color is with gradient maps. Now gradient maps are for me are very experimental. So you might get like I get something like this, and this looks, you know, I could get some really cool effects and experiment with this. And if you go to the mapping here, you have all these default options, but then you can play around with the sliders here. And let's say I want to have this inverted. So let's just say I want more of a bluish tone on my shadows here. Something like that. And then on my lights, I want to have more of a warmer light. You can play here with the slider and actually see the results on your painting. And then maybe you want to add another color, so you can click here on the bottom side here, and then maybe add a little bit of variation here. You can play with the placement of this as well. Something like that. Now, let's say this is something similar to what you want. Now I'm gonna set this, and I have my gradient layer here. Now my gradient layer is a normal here, so you can also play with the blending mode. So I'm gonna use my up and down keys on my keyboard to go through the different blending modes, and maybe I get a happy accident here. You can see there's some pretty cool things that we can take from a couple of these. So you can see the difference between normal and color. It's not bad. Maybe something like more dramatic. Maybe starts with something like this. And since it's an adjustment layer, I can actually bring down the opacity if I don't want too much of that specific effect or colors. And the way I look at this when I'm doing specifically this particular way of coloring is that I think about it in layers. So I'm not gonna do just one thing and then I'm gonna have all my colors ready. I'm gonna do a bunch of watches, like if it was painting in watercolor. I'm gonna do a lot of watches of different techniques and colors and experiments to actually get to my close to my final results. So I'm not just gonna do this and then, you know, have it like, for example, like this, and then call it done, and that's it. So I'm actually gonna bring down the opacity, and I have a kind of like a wash over my scene with some color, and then I keep adding and adding and adding, and that way I build it up consistently with the way I want it. So for example, I can use this layer here that I have in color, maybe bring it on top, put a mask on it, paint black my mask so I don't see it, and then with my brush paint on the mask to kind of reveal some of that color, maybe on the lights area, so that way it looks a little bit warmer, and I have that warmer effect on my light side. And again, you know, I can play with the opacity, I can play with the mask, I can play with the blending modes and all that. And that way, you know, I have all these tools that I can use to add color to my scene. Now again, this is not the way of adding color to a black and white piece. There's so many different ways to do this, but this is just, you know, one way that you can experiment with and try it for yourself and see if it works for you. So I kept my layers here for particular reasons, because for example here I don't want that warm light hitting this side of these rocks. So I'm gonna control click this layer. You can see I have the selection, and on my mask I'm gonna paint black so I don't actually have that affected that side of the rock here. Maybe a little bit on the edges, but not all. Maybe something like that. Okay. And that's it. So these are actually, there's another one here. Let's say another tool that you can use is go to the adjustment layers, and you can do the photo filter adjustment layer here. And what that does is pretty much adds a wash of one color, kind of similar to what we did with the color layer. And here you can play with the intensity or the density of the color. You can actually pick the color specifically that you want, right? Maybe something like that. Or it already has some filters here that are already set up here, and I usually just go through them. It has different warming filters, cooler filters, which is cool. I might go with something like this. But you can play around with the different types of filters here. And the cool thing is you can keep adding some of this for specific areas. For example, I could add a cooling filter like this. And the cool thing about the adjustment layers again is it adds a mask already. So you can go to the mask and paint out the places that I don't want that filter to affect. So this light area is warm. I don't want that filter to affect those areas because I want it to be warm because of the light hitting it. And maybe I can add another filter. And let's say I want to do a little bit of green here. I can click on and off the visibility of that layer to kind of see the difference here. I kind of like that greenish type of light here coming here. And I can just keep going and going and adding, using all these different ways of adding color to actually bring the mood that I want for this piece alive. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to play around with all these different methods of adding color into it. And I'll do a little time lapse so you can actually see the final result of how we take this. Now, before I do that, I also use, but this is not so much about adding color, it's more about editing the color, is that you can go to the adjustment layer color balance. So go to adjustment layers color balance here. And you can add as well, but I use it mostly just to edit the color. So if I want to add some reds here like that, or yellows, go to my highlights and do the same thing. Go to my shadows, maybe add some cyan or green, maybe something like that, very subtle. If you think it's too much, you can lower the opacity, just so it's not that much, right? And you can also do the same thing with the curves. So if you go to the, I'm gonna do the adjustment layer again, curves. Now usually here, when you take a look at it, let me close this, you have an RGB channel here. But if you click the drop down and you go to red, you have your darks and your lights. And let's say I want to add more red to my lights, it will be this side. Or if I want to add or take out red from the darks, it will be this side. So let's just say I want to add reds to my darks. So I'll go here, you can click this up here like that, maybe something like that, very subtle. I can click in the line here and do a graph here just to kind of play around with the different type of options that I have here. Make something like that. Now I can do the same thing for the green and blue. So let's just say go to blue. Do the same thing. I want to add some blue to my shadows here. And you can see here that the line goes all the way up over this middle line on the highlight. So if I don't want the blue to affect my highlights, I can click here on the line and then bring that down. And then that effect only affects the darker here. So you can see it here like that, right? And I can do the same thing for the green. So let's just add a little bit of green here. And you can, you can experiment, do something crazy like this and see what you get. But it's up to you to kind of experiment with this and see where it takes you. All right. So those are all the ways that I normally use when I'm trying to bring when I'm experimenting with color moods for a black and white sketch like this one. Now again, the values are very, very important for color. So each color has its own value. So if you want a specific color, you need to make sure that that value that you have, wherever you're going to apply that color, has that value for that color. Because if not, it's not going to look like the color that you want. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in another episode, because that's just, it could become a little bit complicated. But this is a very experimental way of adding color to a black and white sketch. So I'm gonna work this a little bit more and just to play around with different options here, and I'll check back with you guys in a minute.
Alright guys, that's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that this gives you an idea on how to start adding color to your black and white pieces. And if you have any comments or questions about this episode, let me know in the comment section below so I can actually address it in future videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.